In this lesson, we're going to cover resilience and recovery testing. Now, resilience testing is used to assess a system's ability to withstand and adapt to disruptive events. Recovery testing, on the other hand, will evaluate a system's capacity to restore normal operations after a disruptive event. Now, at their core, these types of resilience and recovery testing will serve as a form of fire drill for our enterprise networks and our organization's operations. These tests can occur using either a tabletop exercise, a failover test, a simulation, or parallel processing to determine how your organization can survive a potentially disruptive event like a power loss, a natural disaster, a ransomware attack, or even a data breach. Now, first, we need to talk about tabletop exercises. A tabletop exercise is a simulated scenario-based discussion among your key stakeholders to assess and improve an organization's preparedness and response to a specific emergency or crisis situation without the need for the actual deployment of its resources. So, what does a tabletop event look like? Well, it's kind of like storytelling with a twist. Imagine that you're sitting around a table with a bunch of other key stakeholders in your organization, and each of you is handed a basic script. Then, a facilitator walks into the room and declares that something bad just happened. For example, they might say that your Security Operations Center just detected that one of your domain controllers has been compromised by a nation-state actor, and they're then going to ask you what your organization is going to do based upon that piece of information about the suspected attack, which we call an exercise inject. At this point, all the stakeholders in the room are now thrown into this hypothetical disaster, and they're going to take turns discussing what actions each of their teams is going to conduct in response to this detected malicious activity. Now, the great thing about a tabletop exercise is that it lets each stakeholder and their team figure out how they're going to respond effectively to the given inject. And this is a fairly low-cost option to use while still providing an extremely engaging environment for those involved in this tabletop exercise. Now, as each stakeholder lays out their planned actions, the other stakeholders can identify gaps or seams in that plan that could cause issues during a real response too. So, these plans will then get adjusted and captured as part of your organization's future standard operating procedures and your playbooks for a future incident response that you can use. Tabletops are also considered to be a form of team building, because all the stakeholders and their teams are going to work together to try and solve the hypothetical disaster or malicious activities that are being injected into that given scenario. Second, we have a failover test. Now, a failover test is a controlled experiment that's designed to verify the seamless transition of a system or application from a primary component to a backup or secondary component in the event of a failure to ensure that uninterrupted functionality can be achieved during a disaster or other incident. For example, if your organization has already decided that if you have a large-scale disaster at your East Coast data center, that you're going to shift all your operations to an alternative hot site that you've located on the West Coast in your data center, this can actually be done using a failover test where we can actually attempt to do this cutover from the East Coast to the West Coast. Now, since we're actually going to be taking all these actions, this does involve more resources, more time, and more energy to perform. But by performing a failover test, you're going to be able to verify that your planned actions will actually work when a real disaster strikes. For example, I used to work for a large organization located near Washington, D.C., and if our facility was affected by a disaster, we had a plan where we could shift our operations to an alternative hot site located about 1,500 miles away. To ensure we could execute this plan during an emergency, we actually tested this using a failover test at least one time per year. In preparation for the failover test, we actually would fly out a small team to the hot site to ensure our operations could continue smoothly. If there were any issues, we always had in place a rollback plan where we could shift operations back to our main facility while we figured out why our failover didn't work out as expected, which only happened once or twice over the several years I was there. Third, we have simulations. Now, a simulation is a computer-generated or artificial representation of a real-world system or scenario that's used to mimic various conditions, interactions, or failures to assess how a system or process will respond in order to refine its performance. Now, unlike a tabletop exercise where the threat is simply a scenario presented on a piece of paper, a simulation actually allows your incident responders and system administrators to perform their response actions inside of a virtualized or simulated environment. For example, with our modern cloud-based infrastructures, we can actually spin up a virtual or simulated version of our corporate network inside of the cloud, and then we can have a red team attack that network while our defenders, who are known as the blue team, are trying to detect that red team's attacks and utilize their proper incident response techniques to isolate the attackers from the network and remove any infected systems from that simulated network. With a simulation, your personnel are able to respond to the simulated crisis in real time, which helps test your reactions in a more realistic environment that you can then evaluate not just the plan itself, but also your staff members and their ability to work during the unpredictable chaos of a cyber attack. After the simulation is over, all of the observers are going to provide feedback on the attacker's performance and the defender's performance so that each side can learn from their mistakes and improve their skills. Now, fourth and finally, we have parallel processing. Parallel processing involves replicating your data and systems processes onto a secondary system, and then you run both the primary and secondary systems together at the same time. Our goal when we conduct parallel processing is to check the reliability and stability of your secondary setup to make sure it can handle processing data without disrupting your day-to-day operations during a disaster. Now, parallel processing does require meticulous planning, flawless execution, and an eagle eye for detail to ensure that there is zero disruption to your ongoing operations, so it is something you have to do very carefully. Now, in resilience testing, we often use parallel processing to help test the system's ability to handle multiple failure scenarios simultaneously, such as network outages, hardware failures, or data corruption. When it comes to recovery testing, we use parallel processing to evaluate how efficiently a system can recover from multiple failure points. So remember, when it comes to tabletop exercises, failover tests, simulations, and parallel processing, our goal here is to plan for the worst and learn how to overcome any obstacles that we might potentially face. Resilience and recovery testing is not just about creating a plan, but it's about creating a plan, testing that plan, and assuring ourselves and our stakeholders that our plan will really work when a disaster or incident does eventually occur to us. Each of these methods, including tabletop exercises, failovers, simulations, and parallel processing, are going to offer us with different insights, the ability to pinpoint various weaknesses, and they'll help us to prepare our teams for just about anything that an attacker or the environment might throw at us. With all of these tests, though, this isn't going to be a one-time thing. Instead, we have to keep doing it routinely. You should regularly test, adapt, and improve your plans to ensure that your plans are evolving in response to the rapidly changing threat environment and any new vulnerabilities that may have emerged over time. After all, your organization's resilience is not just a check in the box, it is an ongoing, ever-continuing journey towards continual improvement.